They say the mountains hold their own kind of silence on Halloween night. Not the quiet you get in a city when everyone's asleep. No, this silence feels alive, like the whole mountain is waiting for something, or someone. That's exactly what pulled me to Black Hollow. Deep in the Appalachian range of Virginia, it's a place I'd only ever heard about in whispers from locals who wouldn't dare go near it once the sun dipped. They called it the hollow where the lights never die, according to the stories. If you walk far enough down the old coal road on Halloween night, you'll see faint lanterns glowing through the trees, lanterns that never go out. Folks say they belong to miners who died when the shafts collapsed back in 1911. Their bodies were never found. I didn't believe it. I was a documentarian, a man who'd spent the last decade chasing myths, and Appalachia, with all its forgotten legends, was a gold mine. So I packed my camera, a flashlight, and my stubborn curiosity, and drove 3 hours into nowhere. The drive itself was unsettling the deeper I went. The more the radio turned to static, the road became narrow and twisted, cutting through endless forest where fog hugged the ground like smoke. Every so often I passed old mailboxes with no names and houses with no lights. When I finally reached the turnoff for Black Hollow Road, the sun was already bleeding orange behind the ridges. I parked by a rusted gate half swallowed by vines and stepped out. The air smelled like iron and rain. My phone had no signal. Perfect. I followed the overgrown path on foot. The trees leaned in close, their branches creaking like bones. The last bits of daylight faded fast, swallowed by the canopy above. I switched on my flashlight. After about 30 minutes, I noticed something odd the deeper I went. The quieter everything became. No wind, no crickets, no nightbirds. Just the crunch of my boots and then light. At first I thought it was a reflection, but when I lifted my head I saw them lanterns. A dozen faint glows hovering between the trees. Stretching down into the fog, my pulse jumped. I steadied my camera and started recording. As I got closer, I realized something wasn't right. The lanterns weren't hanging from anything. They were suspended in midair, perfectly still, burning with a pale yellow flame that didn't flicker. Then I heard it, a low hum, deep and metallic. Like air moving through pipes underground, I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" The hum stopped for a few seconds, nothing. Then a sound came from the dark, tapping like someone knocking on metal. Slow and deliberate tap, tap, tap. The lanterns began to sway, not all at once. Just one, then another, as if something unseen was moving past them. And then a shape appeared. At first it looked human. A man in an old miner's coat, head down, holding a pickaxe. But the closer I looked, the more wrong it became. His skin wasn't skin at all. It looked like ash, cracked and glowing faintly from beneath. His eyes were small, dull lights. I froze. My flashlight dimmed for a moment, like the batteries were dying when it came back. There were more of them, dozens. Men in tattered miner uniforms standing between the trees, motionless except for the faint glow in their chests. Each one held a lantern that burned without flame. I whispered, "Jesus Christ." That was when one of them turned toward me. Slowly his jaw opened wide, far wider than it should have, until it cracked at the hinges. A deep, hollow sound came out, a noise like air being sucked into a cavern, and the rest began to move too, one by one. Dragging their boots across the dirt, I turned and ran. The forest came alive with sounds. The tapping turned to pounding. The hum grew louder, and the air thickened with smoke that burned my throat. My flashlight flickered violently. I could see shapes darting beside me, shadows that shouldn't have been there. When I reached the clearing, I tripped on something, a rusted sign half buried in the mud. I wiped the dirt off and read the faded letters. Black Hollow Mining Co. Closed. October 31st, 1911. My breath caught, because below the date, scratched into the metal, was a list of names. 32 men, all dead. The last name at the bottom, written in a different hand. Fresher than the rest was mine. Daniel F. Cole, my name. I staggered backward. My camera fell into the mud. The lantern light was everywhere now. Brighter, closer, I turned and ran again, this time toward the faint outline of the road. The trees seemed to shift, the path curving where it hadn't before. When I finally broke through the tree line, I collapsed beside my car, gasping. The air was still. The fog had lifted. For a moment I thought I'd imagined everything, until I noticed the dirt under my nails was black, like coal dust, and my camera, still recording, sat a few feet away. I picked it up, my hand shaking. The screen was cracked, but the footage played. I expected static. Instead, I saw myself standing in the clearing, staring at the floating lanterns, but I wasn't alone. Behind me stood one of the miners. His hand was on my shoulder. His face was inches from my ear. He wasn't moving, but in the video, I saw my own lips whisper something. I leaned closer to the speaker. Heart hammering, the voice wasn't mine. It said, "You should not have come back, Daniel." I turned off the camera. I didn't remember leaving the mountains that night. I must have driven. But all I recall is waking up in a motel outside Abingdon, covered in mud and shaking. My headlights were still on when I got home. I mailed the footage to a friend who worked in post-production. I didn't tell him what it was, just asked him to stabilize the video. He called me the next morning, terrified. He said there was no audio in the file. No voice, no whisper, and worst of all, no me. The footage showed the clearing, the floating lights, the miners, but where I should have been standing, there was nothing. Just an empty space where a person should be. I never went back to Black Hollow after that, but every Halloween since, I've received a package on my porch, no return address. Inside, there's always an old lantern, the same kind they used in the mines, and every single one burns with the same pale yellow flame. No matter how many times I throw them away, they always find their way back. Last year, I left the lantern burning on my porch overnight. Around midnight, I woke up to tapping on the window. Tap, tap, tap. When I looked outside, the lantern was gone, but the fog that crept through the yard glowed faintly, like light was moving inside it, and somewhere in the woods beyond my house. I could see them again, the miners still walking, still carrying their lanterns that never die, and maybe one day soon they'll find me. Have you ever heard laughter in a place where no children live? That sound, high, breathy, and echoing through the dark, can freeze your blood faster than any scream. That is what happened to me one Halloween evening in 2019, when I stopped in a small Appalachian town called Ridgetop Hollow, population 418. You could drive through it in 3 minutes and miss it entirely, if not for the single rusted bridge that sat over a stream blacker than oil. The locals called it Old Mill Bridge. It looked ancient, with cracked wood planks and iron rails eaten through by rust. No one used it anymore, except maybe kids daring each other for Halloween dares. The town itself had grown used to its silence. But that night, Halloween night, I learned why no one stayed on that bridge after dark. I was passing through Appalachia to visit family in Kentucky. The fog was so thick I could barely see the road ahead, so I decided to pull over for a few minutes. I parked right beside that old bridge. I rolled my window down, letting the cool October air drift in. The smell hit me first, a sweet, rotting stench, like wet leaves and something dead buried deep under them. Then came the laughter. It was faint at first, distant, like the echo of children playing in another world. I looked around. There was nothing, just forest, mist, and that old bridge. I turned off my car engine to listen closer. That's when I heard the splashing, like small feet running through the shallow water under the bridge. Then giggles, clear this time, sharp, cold. I stepped out of the car with my flashlight. "Hello? Anyone there?" The laughter stopped. The fog rolled thicker, crawling across the bridge planks like smoke from the ground. My flashlight beam bounced over the wooden boards and caught something. Tiny handprints smeared in black. They covered the railing, the planks, even the underside of the bridge. That's when I noticed it, carved into the wood. Hundreds of names, children's names, each followed by a year that ended abruptly. 1922, 1923, 1924. I swallowed hard. I'd read enough Appalachian ghost lore to know what that meant. There had been an old textile mill near Ridgetop Hollow back in the 1920s. It was notorious for using child labor, young kids working 12-hour shifts under the floorboards, breathing cotton dust. One Halloween, the mill caught fire. The owners escaped, the children didn't. The mill was gone now, but its bridge remained, and every Halloween night, the townsfolk whispered, those children came back. I told myself it was just superstition. I stepped onto the bridge anyway. The wood creaked under my weight. The sound echoed like bone snapping. My flashlight flickered once, twice, then went dim. That's when I saw the mist shift. Shapes moved in it, small, hunched fast. I tried to steady the light, and then I heard it again, closer this time. The laughter all around me. I spun in circles, but no one was there. Only the faintest outlines of what looked like children standing at the edge of the bridge, barely visible through the fog. Their eyes glowed faintly blue. I whispered, "Jesus," and that's when one of them stepped forward. A little girl no older than 7, her dress soaked, her face pale as paper. She stared at me with those glowing eyes and whispered something I'll never forget. "We still play here." The boards beneath my feet groaned. Then shifted. I stumbled as one cracked open. Cold water gushed through. Splashing against my legs, I tried to pull back. But something caught my ankle. It felt like fingers. I dropped my flashlight. It rolled across the bridge and stopped at the edge. Still glowing faintly, I looked down. Small, grey hands were reaching up through the crack, clawing at my jeans, pulling me toward the opening. I kicked and screamed, but more hands emerged. Dozens of them, all tiny, all soaked. Their fingernails were black. Their skin looked waterlogged, like something that had been submerged for decades. The laughter turned to cries, not joyful, anguished. Desperate, then a voice, deeper, older, spoke from under the bridge. "You took them from me." The ground shook. The boards split wider. I glimpsed something massive moving beneath the water. A dark shape with long arms and a face hidden in shadow. It wasn't one of the children, it was something with them. Something that kept them there. The hands yanked harder. I grabbed the railing and pulled with everything I had. My arms burned. My heart pounded so hard it drowned the screams. Finally, I broke free and fell backward onto the boards. I didn't look down again. I grabbed the flashlight and ran, sprinting across the bridge as the laughter echoed behind me, growing louder, sharper, until it turned into a single piercing shriek. By the time I reached my car, the fog had turned so thick I couldn't see the bridge anymore. I slammed the door shut and hit the gas, tires spinning mud as I tore down the mountain road. I didn't stop until I saw the first lights of town. When I told the sheriff what happened, he looked at me like I was insane. But when I mentioned the laughter, he froze. He said, "Son, you best not go near that bridge again. Nobody crosses it after dark." Then he told me something that chilled me to my core. 2 months earlier, a group of teenagers had gone missing on that very bridge. Their phones were found scattered in the water below, each one still recording. Every single clip ended the same way, with faint children's laughter and a deep voice whispering, "Stay!" I didn't sleep for days after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the sound of small hands scraping wood. Sometimes I still do, especially when it rains. Last Halloween, I got an anonymous letter in my mailbox. No name, no return address. Just a single sentence written in smudged black ink. "We still play here," that night. I dreamed I was back on that bridge. The children surrounded me again, holding lanterns made from hollow skulls. The little girl reached out her hand and said softly, "Come play, mister." When I woke up, my shoes were wet. My floor was covered in tiny, muddy footprints leading from the door to my bed, and right outside my window, on the edge of the fog, I heard laughter again. Only this time it wasn't far away. It was whispering my name. It began with a voice calling my name from the trees. Not a shout, not a scream, just a whisper. Low, trembling, drawn out, as if the woods themselves had learned to speak. I had heard stories about Hollow Creek, a narrow stretch deep in the Appalachian Mountains where sound travels strange. Old miners used to say their own echoes would answer questions they never asked. I thought it was just legend until I went there myself. It was October 30th, 2 days before Halloween. I was driving home from a camping trip with a few friends. We'd split off earlier that evening when fog rolled in and the GPS started glitching. My car was nearly out of gas, so when I saw a hand-painted sign that said, Hollow Creek 2 miles, I turned in. The road was barely a path, twisting between skeletal trees, their branches scraping against my windshield like claws. Leaves blanketed the ground, thick enough to muffle my tires. By the time I reached the creek, night had fallen. There was no town, just a wooden sign half buried in dirt, and a single streetlight flickering over a small bridge. The silence was heavy. I stepped out of my car, and the air was cold enough to bite through my jacket. That's when I heard it, a voice faint, distant, but clear. Eli, my name. I froze. No one should have known I was there. The sound came again, this time closer from beyond the creek. Eli, come here. It was a woman's voice, soft, almost kind. But something in it felt wrong, too slow, too measured. Like she was forcing every word through a smile. I should have gotten back in my car. I should have driven away. But curiosity can be louder than fear. I took my flashlight and stepped onto the bridge. The water below was still, black as oil, reflecting the pale moonlight. On the other side, the trees grew denser, forming a narrow tunnel that swallowed the light whole. The voice came again. Eli. I aimed my flashlight toward the sound. Between the trees I saw movement and a figure. She was standing by the water's edge, her hair long and tangled, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned white dress. Her face was turned away, but I could see her bare feet sinking into the mud. Ma'am, are you all right? I called out. She didn't answer. She only tilted her head slightly, like she was listening for something behind her. The wind picked up, rattling the trees. I could smell something foul, a wet, earthy stench mixed with rot. I stepped closer. The woman turned around. Her face was pale and bloated, eyes hollow and black as tar. Her mouth hung open, and when she spoke again, the voice that came out wasn't hers. Eli, help us! The sound wasn't one voice, and it was dozens, layered on top of each other. Children, men, women, all whispering the same plea in unison. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my flashlight. The beam flickered, and for a moment I saw behind her a dozen more shapes in the fog, standing perfectly still. They were all half submerged in the creek, water lapping at their waists. Their faces were gray, eyes empty, and each one opened their mouth as if to speak. But what came out wasn't sound, it was air cold. Rushing air that hissed like the wind through a graveyard. I ran back toward the bridge, but the planks groaned under my feet. And then I realized it wasn't the wood making that sound. It was the whispers. They were coming from below. The creek bubbled violently as dozens of pale hands broke the surface, reaching upward, grasping at the air. My name echoed again, distorted, rising and falling like a chant. Eli, stay! Stay! I sprinted the last few steps, but something caught my ankle. I looked down, a hand gray and bloated, its nails broken to the quick, clutched my jeans. I kicked it off, fell onto the road and crawled toward my car. I slammed the door shut and locked it. Shaking uncontrollably, the voices didn't stop. They were outside now, whispering, circling. The car windows fogged from the inside, even though I wasn't breathing that hard. Then, one by one, handprints began appearing on the glass. Small ones, large ones, dozens of them. The engine wouldn't start. The headlights flickered weakly, then died. I sat there in the dark, gripping the steering wheel, and then I heard it again. A soft knock on the window beside me. I turned slowly. The woman was standing there. Her head tilted, her eyes black voids. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Then, her lips stretched wider, impossibly wide, until her face split at the corners. And from that gaping mouth, a voice spoke directly into my head. "You heard us. Now you belong here too." The world spun. I screamed and covered my ears, but the sound wasn't coming from outside. It was inside my skull, echoing over and over until my vision went white. When I woke up, it was morning. My car was still parked by the bridge. The air was still. The creek looked normal, calm, silent, beautiful even. I tried to start the car again. It worked this time. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, something made my blood turn cold. There were wet footprints on the back seat, small ones, child-sized. I drove until I hit the next gas station, shaking. The attendant, an old man with a thick Appalachian accent, stared at me when I told him where I'd come from. "You been down Hollow Creek?" he asked. I nodded. He sighed. "They whisper your name when they want you to join them. That's how they pull you back. Don't ever answer when they call again." I laughed nervously. "You really believe that?" He leaned closer, his eyes dead serious. "Boy, look at your shoulder." I turned. My jacket was damp, and on the fabric, smeared faintly in gray mud, was a perfect handprint. That night I stayed at a motel. I barely slept. Every time I started drifting off, I'd hear faint whispers outside the window, calling my name. "Eli, come back." By dawn, I decided to leave Appalachia altogether, but as I was packing my things, I saw something move under the motel door. A shadow, followed by the sound of dripping water. I looked down. A small puddle was forming at my feet, seeping from under the door, and then I saw it, reflected in the water, my own face staring back at me. Except the reflection smiled. I didn't. The puddle rippled once. Then a voice whispered from the floor, "We told you not to leave." The lights flickered. I grabbed my keys and ran. I've never gone near Hollow Creek again. The fog rolled over the Appalachian ridge like slow breath, heavy and silver under the half-moon. The night was unnaturally quiet. No crickets, no rustling leaves, no distant owls. Only the faint whisper of wind that carried the smell of damp soil and pine. Eli Turner had lived in Boone County his whole life. He knew the mountain paths better than most folks knew the roads downtown. But this trail he was on tonight, this one he swore he had never seen before, it had appeared behind his cabin that evening, like something the forest had decided to reveal. A narrow dirt path lined with gnarled roots and a faint glow flickering at the far end. At first, Eli thought it was just moonlight catching something metallic. But as he stepped closer, he realized it was a lantern, old, rusted, swinging gently from a crooked branch. Its flame burned an odd bluish color. He should have turned back. But curiosity, mixed with that mountain-born stubbornness, pushed him forward. The deeper he walked, the stranger everything became. The trees were too close together, their trunks twisting toward him like reaching arms. The air grew thick, heavy with the smell of iron and something sweet, like decaying fruit. And then he noticed something that made his chest tighten. The sound of his footsteps had vanished. Eli stopped and stomped. The dirt didn't make a sound, his breathing silent. Even the whisper of wind was gone. The world had muted itself, as if the forest was holding its breath, and then a voice. "Eli," it came from just behind him, soft and cracked. like someone whispering through splinters of glass. He spun around, but no one was there, only the blue lantern. Still swaying, he reached for it, hand trembling, and the instant his fingers brushed the metal handle, everything around him shifted. The forest dimmed. The air turned cold enough that his breath frosted before him. The trees looked older, rotted, hollow, leaning inward like tombstones, and from between them came figures. Dozens of them, barefoot, thin, faces pale and stretched, eyes hollowed out as if burned away. Their clothes were from another century, torn suspenders, ragged dresses, bonnets stained with mud. They walked with a jerking, lifeless rhythm, heads twitching slightly as if listening to something Eli couldn't hear. He stumbled backward, the lantern shaking in his hand. "Who's there?" he called, but the words came out flat as if swallowed by the air. One of the figures stopped, a woman, tall and frail, her skin as thin as parchment, her head tilted to the side, bones cracking. "You came when we called," she rasped. Eli's heart slammed in his chest. "Called? What do you mean?" The woman pointed a bony finger toward the flame. "The lantern belongs to the hollow. You lit it. Now you stay," the others began to whisper. All in unison, a low, eerie hum that built into a droning chant. Eli's vision blurred as shadows coiled around his boots, creeping upward like smoke. He dropped the lantern, and it hit the ground without a sound. But the flame didn't go out. It grew brighter, bluer. The figures shrieked, their mouths stretching impossibly wide, faces distorting as though melting in the light. The sound tore through the silence like metal scraping stone. Eli turned and ran, blindly, desperate, stumbling through roots and mud. He didn't care where the path led. He just wanted out. But when he looked up, his cabin was there. Only not quite right. The windows were shattered, the door hanging loose, the porch rotted through. The lantern's light flickered through the cracks of the walls, dancing on the inside as if something or someone was carrying it. Eli's breath came in shallow bursts. He stepped onto the porch, and the boards groaned like they were sighing. Inside, he could hear footsteps pacing. Slow, deliberate, he called out, "Who's there?" The footsteps stopped. Then came that same whisper again, right beside his ear. "You came when we called." Eli spun and saw his own reflection standing in the doorway. Same clothes, same eyes, but this version of him was pale, blood trailing from its nose, and its mouth curved into an unnatural grin. It reached toward him, and the last thing Eli saw before everything went black was the flickering blue glow of that cursed lantern, and his reflection stepping forward into the light. 3 days later, hikers from the next town found Eli's cabin. The door was locked from the inside, windows boarded up, and the place reeked of damp rot. They called the sheriff, thinking it was just another missing person case. When they finally broke through the door, the cabin was empty except for a lantern. It sat in the middle of the floor, still glowing blue, even though there was no fuel. No wick, nothing to keep it burning. The sheriff took it back to the station, thinking it was some kind of old collectible. But by the next morning he was gone too. The lantern was found hanging outside his house, swinging gently in the early dawn breeze. Locals in Boone County now call it the Lantern in the Hollow. Every October, when the fog rolls down thick and low, they say you can see that strange blue light flickering deep in the woods. Those who follow it never come back, except sometimes on foggy nights when their faces appear in the trees, whispering the same phrase Eli heard. "You came when we called." If you ever see a lone lantern burning blue in the Appalachian woods this October, do not follow it, because the hollow remembers. I remember the sound before I saw anything, the kind of hollow, metallic ringing that does not belong in the woods. It was Halloween night, and I was driving through a stretch of old road that twisted along the Appalachian ridges like a black serpent. The fog was so thick that my headlights did not reach more than a few feet ahead. Somewhere beyond that veil of white, something metallic was clanging against rock. Again and again, steady as a heartbeat. At first, I thought it was just a loose road sign, or maybe a power pole shifting in the cold wind. But the noise was too rhythmic, too deliberate. Like someone hammering metal against stone, I slowed down, rolled my window down, and leaned out into the freezing night air. The sound stopped. That was when I saw it, something moving between the trees on the left side of the road. It was pale, barely visible through the fog, but tall enough to stand out against the dark woods. I froze, gripping the steering wheel tight. The shape did not move toward me, but I could feel its attention like a weight pressing against my chest. For a second it tilted its head, slowly, unnaturally, as though studying me, then it vanished into the mist. I slammed the window shut and kept driving, my heart hammering so loud it drowned out the engine. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, maybe just a hiker or a trick of the fog. But a few minutes later, that metallic clang came again, closer this time, almost right beside me. When I finally reached the small mountain town of Darby's Hollow, I was shaking so badly that I parked in front of the only open building I could find, a diner called Maple's Rest, its neon sign flickering. Inside, the smell of coffee and fried onions was a relief. A few locals were sitting in silence, nursing drinks, their faces pale in the yellow light. The waitress, a thin woman with a cigarette voice, looked up at me and frowned. "Road that foggy up there?" she asked. "Worse than I've ever seen," I said, forcing a laugh. "And there's some guy out there, tall, wearing something pale, maybe white clothes." She froze. One of the old men at the counter stopped stirring his coffee. The air in the diner went still. "You said white clothes?" the old man asked quietly. "Yeah," I said. "You know him?" He glanced at the waitress, then back at me. "Ain't know him, son. You need to turn around before midnight." I tried to laugh again, but no one else joined me. The waitress leaned closer. "You saw the bell ringer," she whispered. I blinked. "The what?" "Every Halloween," she said, voice trembling slightly. "The bell ringer walks the fog, back when this town was still a mining camp. There was a cave-in up on Harrow Ridge, 13 men trapped. One of them tried to lead the rescue, kept ringing an iron bell to guide the others through the dark tunnels. But the mine collapsed again before he made it out. They say he still rings that bell, looking for someone to follow him home." The old man nodded slowly. "And anyone who follows that sound don't come back. Some say it ain't even him anymore, just something that wears his shape." A chill crawled down my neck. "You're joking," I said. No one laughed. I sat there for a while, drinking my coffee, trying to calm down. But when I looked out the diner window, the fog had thickened, rolling down the mountain like smoke. I thought about waiting it out until morning. But some foolish, curious part of me wanted proof. I told myself it was just a story, so I left a few bills on the counter, nodded at the waitress, and stepped back into the cold. The fog swallowed me whole. The air felt heavier now, like it was pressing against my skin. I walked a little way down the main road. Listening, the silence was absolute. Not even crickets. Then came that sound again. Clang, clang, slow, patient, echoing from somewhere up the ridge. I followed it. The road curved upward into the trees, and with every step the fog grew denser. My flashlight beam bounced off the mist, showing only vague outlines of twisted branches. Clang, clang. Each strike seemed to draw me further in, like it was keeping pace with my heartbeat. After 10 minutes of walking, the beam of my light caught something metallic, a bell, hanging from a crooked wooden post in the middle of the path. It was rusted and cracked, swaying slightly, though there was no wind. The sound was coming from it, but not from outside, from inside the bell, like something trapped was striking the metal from within. I raised my flashlight and saw movement behind the post. A man, or what looked like one, stood half hidden in the fog. His clothes were grey, stained with mud. His face was wrong, too long, too smooth, as if stretched tight over bone, and in his hand he held a rusted piece of rebar, which he lifted and brought down slowly onto the bell. Clang! He turned toward me, and the air dropped cold enough to burn my lungs. I stumbled backward, tripping on the uneven ground. The man tilted his head, studying me with hollow eyes, then began to walk forward, each step perfectly measured, the rebar dragging behind him, leaving a line in the dirt. I ran. Branches whipped against my face as I tore back down the road. The clang of the bell followed me, somehow matching the rhythm of my racing footsteps. Clang, clang, closer now. I didn't dare look back. My breath tore at my throat. My chest felt like it was caving in when I finally saw the diner's sign through the fog. Flickering faintly, I screamed for help. The door burst open. The old man from the counter and the waitress were standing there. Eyes wide, they pulled me inside, slammed the door, and locked it. The noise stopped instantly. "Did he touch you?" the waitress asked. I shook my head, trembling. "No, but he followed me," the old man sighed, rubbing his temples. "You're lucky, son. He only follows those who listen. That's how he finds you." I stared at them, heart pounding. "Then what do I do now?" "Don't answer if you hear the bell again," the waitress said. "No matter what, just ignore it." I stayed in that diner until morning, staring out at the fog. When dawn finally came, the mist began to thin, and for the first time I could see the ridgeline in the distance. There, barely visible through the pale light, was the shape of a man standing at the edge of the trees. Holding a long piece of metal in his hand, he lifted it once more. Clang! Then he turned and disappeared into the forest. I never drove that road again, but sometimes late at night, when fog settles heavy around my house, I swear I still hear that slow. It was a cold Halloween night in the deep heart of the Appalachian Mountains, and the moon hung low over the black ridges like a watchful eye. The small town of Roaring Creek sat nestled between two towering peaks, where fog rolled like waves, and every porch light flickered beneath its heavy shroud. Most folks stayed indoors on Halloween, not because of superstition, but because they remembered. They remembered the voices that sometimes echoed through the hollow, the whispers that carried through the wind, calling out names of the living. But Mason Clay wasn't like most folks. He had just moved to Roaring Creek a few months prior, looking for solitude after a messy divorce. He rented a small log cabin on the outskirts of town, quiet, peaceful, and surrounded by endless forest. The locals had warned him not to walk the hollows after sundown, especially not in late October, but Mason didn't pay much attention. He liked to hike at night. He said it helped him think. That Halloween around 10 p.m., he put on his jacket, grabbed his flashlight, and stepped outside. The air was sharp and wet, smelling faintly of pine and smoke. A light mist clung to the trees, and somewhere in the distance an owl called out. Mason started down the dirt path that wound into the hollow, the same path the locals had told him wasn't meant for outsiders. As he walked deeper, he noticed how the woods seemed unnaturally quiet. No crickets, no frogs, just the soft crunch of his boots on damp leaves. Then he heard it, faint at first, like a whisper carried by the wind. "Mason." He froze. The voice was faint but unmistakable. It came from somewhere ahead of him, deeper in the hollow. He clicked his flashlight toward the sound, but the fog swallowed the beam. His heart thudded in his chest, and he laughed nervously to himself. "Probably just the wind," he muttered. But when the voice came again, this time closer, sharper, almost pleading, his blood ran cold. "Mason, come here." It was the voice of his ex-wife, Emily. He hadn't heard her voice in months, not since she told him she never wanted to see him again. It was impossible. She lived states away, and yet he could swear it was her tone. That same soft edge, that same tremor. He took a cautious step forward, shining the light through the mist. The trees ahead seemed to bend inward. As if closing him in, every instinct screamed to turn back. But curiosity pulled him further. "Mason," the voice called again. "You left me here." He stopped breathing for a moment. Left her here. The ground beneath his boots turned slick with mud, and the forest seemed to darken around him. Then, just beyond the beam of his light, he saw something move, a shadow between the trees. "It looked human, Emily," he whispered. The figure didn't answer. It just stood there, slightly hunched, as if its neck were bent too far forward. Mason took another step, flashlight trembling in his hand. "Emily, is that you?" The figure moved, slowly, unnaturally, like its limbs didn't know how to work. The head turned first, followed by the shoulders, twisting far too much for a normal person. And when the light finally hit its face, Mason's stomach dropped. It was her, or at least it looked like her, but her eyes were hollow, empty sockets, weeping thin trails of black. Her lips were cracked open, and when she spoke again, her voice came from somewhere deeper. Not from her mouth, but from the hollow itself. "You left me here." Mason stumbled backward, tripping over a root. His flashlight clattered to the ground and rolled, its beam flickering across the forest floor. When he scrambled up to grab it, the figure was gone. The woods went completely silent again. He turned in circles, shouting her name, but no sound came back. Then he heard footsteps, dozens of them circling him from all directions, soft, wet footsteps moving just beyond the edge of his light. "Mason!" Dozens of voices whispered now, overlapping, echoing through the fog. "Stay with us." He swung the light wildly, his breath ragged. The forest was alive with movement, shapes darting between trees, pale faces peeking from behind trunks. And then he saw them. Bodies, half buried in the mud, dozens of faces, some young, some old, their eyes open and mouths frozen mid-scream, reaching up through the soil as if trying to escape. And standing above them were the shadows, pale, distorted versions of people, whispering, watching, waiting. Mason turned and ran, branches whipped his face. Mud splashed up his legs and his lungs burned with cold air. The whispers followed him all the way up the trail, each one a name, each one calling him back. When he finally burst out of the woods, his porch light flickered in the distance like a beacon. He didn't stop running until he was inside. Doctor locked, chest heaving, he looked through the window. Nothing. Just fog and trees. The forest was silent again. But that night Mason didn't sleep, because just before dawn, as he sat trembling in his chair, he heard it again, faint just outside the door, a whisper. "Mason." When the sun came up, the fog lifted, and the sheriff came by to check on him. Mason Clay was gone, his front door stood open, and muddy footprints led from the porch back into the hollow. They never found him, but locals say if you walk the hollow on Halloween night, you can still hear his voice among the others, calling for help, forever lost in the mist. If you ever find yourself driving near Roaring Creek this Halloween, keep your windows rolled up and your lights bright, because in those Appalachian hollows, not everything that calls your name wants you to find it. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to Fear Begins, and let us know in the comments. In the upper reaches of the Appalachian Mountains, where the roads narrow to single dirt tracks and fog sits heavy on the trees like smoke, there is a place few dare to visit after dark. A forgotten stretch of land known as Dead Crow Ridge. Locals say the name came from a murder of crows that once covered the trees so thick it looked like the branches themselves were alive. But there's another story, whispered quietly in the mountain towns below, about the Hollow Children. It was Halloween night when Emily Porter first heard of them. She was visiting her grandmother in the town of Baxter's Hollow, an isolated community tucked deep in the Blue Ridge region. Her grandmother, a tough old woman who'd lived through 6 decades of Appalachian winters, warned her never to drive past the old Dead Crow Road after sundown. "They come down when the fog does," she said, her voice cracking as she stirred her tea. "The children that ain't children no more. You hear 'em laughing." "You best not laugh back," Emily laughed it off, assuming it was just an old superstition. Another folk tale meant to keep kids indoors on Halloween night. But she wasn't a kid anymore. She was 27, a travel vlogger looking for authentic horror legends to record for her October special. So that night, against her grandmother's wishes, she packed her camera, a flashlight, and a thermos of coffee, and drove straight up Dead Crow Ridge. The road was narrow, cracked, and covered in leaves. The air outside her window grew colder as she climbed higher, and soon the fog rolled in, thick, gray, swallowing everything beyond her headlights. The world shrank to a tunnel of white mist, and her GPS signal disappeared. She should have turned back. But Emily pressed forward, recording everything. "October 31st, she said into her camera, her breath fogging the lens. "Exploring Dead Crow Ridge, local legend says this is where the Hollow children roam. Let's see what happens when the sun goes down." The clock on her dashboard blinked 10:17 p.m. Then the radio crackled, just static at first, but soon faint voices slipped through. Children's laughter. Emily frowned, turning the knob. "Weird," she muttered. "No signal out here." The laughter faded. Then came a whisper, soft, almost buried in the static. "Emily, come play." Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. The voice was unmistakable. It said her name. She looked around the fog, but there was nothing beyond her headlights except trees. She pulled over by the side of the road and killed the engine. The silence was thick. Even the crickets had stopped. She stepped out, flashlight cutting through the mist. The ground crunched with frost. That's when she saw them, tiny footprints in the dirt. Barefoot, dozens of them, they led away from the road, down a small trail between the trees. Against every sane thought in her head, she followed. The forest was quiet except for the distant sound of wind, or maybe voices weaving through the branches. Her light flickered once, then steadied as she walked. She began to notice strange carvings in the trees, crude stick figures scratched deep into the bark. Some were small, like children had made them. Others were twisted, elongated. Their arms stretched far too long. She whispered to herself, "This is perfect footage." Then she heard laughter, soft, high-pitched. Right behind her, Emily spun around, flashlight shaking. The beam caught movement, something darting between the trees. Fast and low, her pulse thundered. "Hello?" she called. "Is someone there?" No answer then. A giggle closer this time. She whipped her light toward it. A small shape stood just ahead. It was a child, at least. It looked like one, maybe 7 or 8 years old. Wearing a tattered dress, but her skin was pale, almost gray, and her eyes reflected the light like a cat's. "Sweetheart," Emily said carefully, lowering her camera. "Are you lost?" The little girl tilted her head. Then she smiled, too wide, stretching the corners of her mouth into something wrong. More laughter echoed from behind Emily. She turned. There were more of them now. A dozen shapes moving in the fog, small and fast, circling her. Their giggles rose into a chorus, echoing through the hollow. Emily stumbled backward, tripping on a root. Her flashlight hit the ground, spinning, and for a split second, she saw all of them, children, barefoot, filthy, their clothes hanging in tatters, but their faces, oh God, their faces, hollow sockets where eyes should be, thin lines for mouths. Each one grinning, they began to whisper, overlapping high and cold, "Play with us. Stay with us." Emily scrambled to her feet and ran. Branches whipped her arms, her breath coming in gasps. She didn't care about her camera anymore. She didn't care about the car, she just needed to get out. But the forest didn't let her go. The fog thickened. Every direction looked the same, and the laughter followed when she finally burst onto the road again. She was covered in mud, shaking. Her car sat where she left it, door open. Light still on, she dove inside, slammed the door and locked it. Her hands trembled as she turned the key. The engine roared to life. She floored it down the hill, never looking back. The fog began to thin as she descended, and for a moment she thought she was safe. But then she caught something in her rear-view mirror, movement, the children, dozens of them, running after her. Their pale faces stretched wide, their limbs jerking unnaturally fast. Keeping pace with her car as the laughter filled the night, Emily screamed and hit the gas harder. The tires squealed and then they vanished, just gone, swallowed by the fog. When she reached her grandmother's house just before dawn, she was hysterical, covered in scratches and dirt. She never uploaded the footage she recorded that night. She refused to talk about what she saw, but 2 weeks later, a hunter found her car abandoned again at the top of Dead Crow Ridge, door open, camera sitting on the passenger seat. The last video file recorded at exactly 3:07 a.m. showed Emily sitting in the car, whispering through tears. They're outside the window. Then came laughter. Then nothing. To this day, locals say if you drive that ridge on Halloween night, you can see small handprints on your windows, pressed from the outside even when you are miles from anyone. And if you roll your window down, you'll hear them whisper your name, asking you to play. If you ever find yourself lost in the fog on Dead Crow Ridge, and you hear laughter that does not belong, do not look, do not answer, because those are not children anymore. If you felt chills while listening, make sure to subscribe to Fear Begins and comment below. Would you dare drive Dead Crow Ridge this Halloween night? They say every October in the Appalachian Mountains, when the nights turn bitter and the mist crawls low across the valleys, a single lantern light can be seen moving slowly down Black Hollow Road. No one carries it, yet it floats steady, weaving between the trees, stopping when you stop, following when you run. Those who chase it never come back. Halloween night 2021, the kind that bites your skin. With wind that sounds like whispers in the dark, 3 friends, Owen, Blake, and Riley, decided to spend the night exploring abandoned places for their YouTube ghost hunting channel. They had heard of the Lantern of Black Hollow Road from an old Reddit post. Claiming it was the most haunted road in the Appalachians, locals in town told them not to go. "That light don't lead you home," one old man warned as they gassed up at a roadside station. "It leads you where you don't come back." But of course that only made them more curious. The road was deep in the mountains, unpaved, cracked, lined with pines that leaned in like watchful figures. The air smelled of wet leaves and earth. At 10:43 p.m. they arrived. They parked near an old, rotted wooden sign half buried in weeds. It read, "Black Hollow Road, do not enter after dusk." "Perfect," Blake said with a grin, grabbing his camera. "Let's make this our Halloween special." They started walking. The only light came from their flashlights and the thin slice of moon above. The woods on either side were silent. No crickets, no owls, just stillness. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, they joked. Filmed short bits for their audience. Even staged a few fake jump scares, but around midnight, as fog began to curl across the road, Riley froze. "Wait," she whispered. "Do you see that?" A faint yellow light flickered far down the path. At first it looked like someone holding a lantern. It bobbed slowly, weaving between the trees. Too far to make out who or what carried it. Owen zoomed in with his camera. "Could be a camper," he said, but his voice sounded less certain than he wanted it to. Blake, always the skeptic, waved them forward. Let's check it out. Could be another team filming. They walked toward it. The light drifted deeper into the woods, just far enough to stay out of reach. Hello? Riley called out. Who's there? No answer. The light just hovered, then slowly slid off the road into the trees. Something about it felt wrong. Too steady, too deliberate, they followed, their breaths visible in the cold. The forest seemed to swallow sound. The further they walked, the quieter everything became, until even the crunch of their boots faded into a dull hum. Then the light stopped beside a clearing. At the center was an old well. Half covered in moss and vines, the lantern hung above it, swaying slightly though there was no wind. Riley whispered, Owen, are you filming this? Owen nodded, his lens trembling. Yeah, Blake stepped closer. Probably some prank. He reached out to grab the lantern. The moment his fingers brushed it, the light went out. Darkness fell, absolute and suffocating. Riley screamed. Something moved, and not in front of them, but all around. Branches snapped. A low, breathy sound echoed through the clearing, like someone exhaling behind their ears. Owen fumbled for his flashlight. It flickered on, and he froze. Standing between the trees were people, dozens of them, pale faces, hollow eyes glowing faintly yellow. Every one of them carried a lantern. They stood still, watching. Blake stumbled back, whispering, Guys, what the hell is this? The lanterns began to sway, back and forth in perfect unison, and then, one by one, they started walking forward. The air grew colder. The lights reflected in the wet ground like fire dancing on water. Run! Owen shouted. They bolted through the trees, branches clawing their faces. The lights followed, gliding silently behind them. Every time Riley looked back, the figures were closer, moving unnaturally fast. Their faces blurred like smoke. Owen's camera caught flashes. The road, the trees, their terrified faces, until the footage cut abruptly to black at 2:17 a.m. A truck driver passing through the lower stretch of Black Hollow Road spotted a car parked on the shoulder with its hazard lights on. The doors were open. Inside lay 3 cell phones, still recording. No trace of Owen, Blake, or Riley was ever found. When authorities reviewed the footage, the final frame showed a faint yellow light approaching the camera. Then a whisper, "You shouldn't have followed," and then static. The video went viral. Some said it was staged, a marketing stunt. Others claimed to see ghostly figures in the static, faces flickering behind the light. But the locals of Appalachia, they knew better. They said the lantern of Black Hollow Road was never meant to guide the living. It was a lure, a beacon for the lost, leading them to the old well where the first settlers buried a secret no one speaks of. A secret that demanded new souls every October. And if you drive that road on a foggy Halloween night, sometimes just before dawn, you can still see it. A single lantern light moving slow through the mist, waiting for someone curious enough to follow. If you ever see it, keep your eyes forward. Do not slow down, do not stop. Because once that light chooses you, it never goes away. They say that's why sometimes late at night, when you're driving alone, you'll see a faint glow in your rearview mirror. Following, always following, and that's how the lantern of Black Hollow Road keeps its fire burning. If you ever find yourself deep in the Appalachian fog this Halloween and you see a light flickering in the trees, promise me, do not follow it. Some roads are not meant to be traveled twice. Make sure to hit subscribe to Fear Begins for more true terrifying Appalachian stories, and comment below, would you follow the light if you saw it tonight?